What's up, folks? Mike here for CMCC Builds with this week's character build. The genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist, Tony Stark,
I am
Iron Man. I've been sitting on this build for a while now. When I started the channel, I had a bunch of builds that used the Artificer class, and I didn't want to bunch too many of those together, so I decided to give this one some time. Of all the futuristic, high-tech builds you can do in D&D, Iron Man may just be one of the most adaptable. A big part of this is how Iron Man has been portrayed in the MCU, specifically some of the later Avenger movies. Once more the cosmic and alien elements entered into the MCU, Iron Man's abilities veered from grounded yet fantastical tech to almost entirely fantastical once the Russo brothers took the reins, both of whom are huge Dungeons & Dragons fans. This becomes entirely apparent once nanotechnology is introduced and you see the spell-like abilities that Iron Man gets with his new suits, starting with Infinity War. Iron Man's tech is pretty much just magic at this point, which allows most of his abilities and tech goodies to translate really well into a fantasy setting like Dungeons & Dragons. He can fly, blast energy, explode things, take punches from one of the most powerful beings in the universe, get stabbed by one of the most powerful beings in the universe, withstand a nuclear blast, build insane tech, control a host of machines to do his bidding, and of course charm our pants off. I think we all know if you're going to play Iron Man, you're going to be an Artificer. So straight Artificer 1 through 20, call it a day, right? Well, not so fast. Iron Man has a lot of abilities, and I'm just talking about MCU Iron Man here. A ton of stuff he can do, and that's going to require some interesting multiclassing that shouldn't disappoint. With that quick intro out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into the build. The racial pick here is very easy. Tony is a human, and we won't have a need for any racial features like we did with the Batman build. It's also necessary that we boost multiple ability scores, so we'll want to go with variant human here. Take whichever language you desire. Tony does speak many different languages, so this is perfectly in line with his linguistic skills. For the ability score increases, take a +1 in charisma and a +1 in intelligence. For the free skill, I went with investigation here, an intelligence-based skill that does a good job of representing a high intellect character's ability to research and find information. Tony, of course, is incredibly smart, arguably one of the smartest humans in the MCU, so those intelligence-based skills are perfect for him. For the feat, here I'm going to suggest the alert feat. This has less to do with Tony and more to do with what will be a low dexterity score and the effects of the various AI and heads-up display system Tony develops and will need to replicate. Alert gives the +5 initiative bonus, which will do a lot to offset the poor initiative we'd have otherwise. Iron Man is agile and quick, so a poor initiative would not be in line with the character at all. Fixing that initiative is a good start in this area. Alert also prevents us from being surprised, which is a perfect feature for the Iron Man's HUD systems and AI alerts. And the final clause of the feat prevents other creatures from gaining advantage on us when they're unseen by us. Again, perfect for the AI and HUD systems of the Iron Man suit. For the abilities, using point buy as always, we'll take an 8 in strength, an 8 in dexterity, 14 in constitution, 15 in intelligence, 10 in wisdom, and 15 in charisma. The racial bonuses bump both intelligence and charisma to 16s, and we have one of those rare instances where the ability scores match the character pretty closely in this build. That only happens when the mechanical benefits of the class match up with the ability scores needed for that class. In other words, we're picking scores based on the mechanical requirements we have for the build, and not how closely it mimics the character's perceived physical and mental traits. But in this case, we have a supremely intelligent and charming Tony Stark focusing on both intelligence and charisma. Pretty cool. But what are we going to do with those stats? First, for our background, go with a custom background to get 2 skills and 2 languages. Take whichever languages you like and work for your campaign. Again, Tony speaks a ton of languages, so go wild here. For the additional skill proficiencies, I'd suggest taking Persuasion to help boost that Tony charm. Although if the falling out in Civil War is any indication, perhaps Tony's persuasion skills need some work. I also took Medicine. Tony is obviously very advanced in the areas of AI and physiology since he created multiple AI systems and engineered a variety of powered suits. A strong knowledge of the brain and body would be needed to facilitate that expertise, and Medicine is probably the most appropriate skill to align with those areas. The noble background feature Position of Privilege works great for billionaire types like Tony. So with a high intelligence and high charisma, where are we going to start? Well, Artificer, of course. Tony is a genius, one of the world's best inventors and engineers. His intellect is rivaled only by super geniuses like Banner, Strange, Hank Pym, Helen Cho, a couple S.H.I.E.L.D. members, and surpassed only by Shuri, who according to the Russo brothers is the smartest person on Earth in the MCU. I didn't realize that until I researched this build. Good for her. Point being, Tony builds. We have that in common, wink wink. And if any class encompasses that style of character, especially when those builds are so technologically advanced that they're basically magic robot suits, we have to go Artificer. Add to that, Artificer, despite being a half-caster, rounds their spell slots up for multi-class purposes, and gives Constitution saving throw proficiency, and proficiency with medium armor and shields, and this has to be our starting class to kick things off. Equip some makeshift armor, and you're starting off as old school Mark 1 Iron Man. Not quite the offensive and defensive stalwart that later versions of the suit are. This class also gives us Thieves' Tools and Tinker Tool proficiency, that latter being entirely necessary for this build. We also get 2 skill proficiencies and another tool proficiency. For the 2 skills, go with Arcana because technology and magic are overlapped in this world and it's another intelligence-based skill. I also took History, once again an intelligence-based skill that just helps support that encyclopedic knowledge that Tony possesses. At level 1, we also get Magical Tinkering. I've had several builds take Artificer before, but none have seemed a better fit for this ability than Tony Stark. The guy tinkers. It's what he does. He also built a tiny energy reactor in the middle of a cave with his heart hooked to a car battery. If anyone can breathe life into mundane objects, it's Tony. Here we also get spellcasting. For cantrips, I'll suggest taking Guidance to represent the aid Stark gets and can give to others via his advanced AI systems like Jarvis, Friday, and Edith. You're not getting guided by a god, just a computer. With the other cantrip, take Thorn Whip. The Iron Man armor has its own grappling chain tech, even more powerful than the Mandalorian's whipcord. Thorn Whip does a good job of replicating this for us while providing the always good force movement on large or smaller creatures that you hit with a melee attack. For level 1 spells, we'll want to take Absorb Elements. Iron Man's armor has been shown to absorb even Thor's electricity, and it only serves to power him up. It was even featured in my 5e Spells and Movies video. We've also seen the suit's fire suppression system in Civil War, and the armor also forms a protective barrier against most other energy sources, even the radiation from space. We can take Cure Wounds here. We saw Tony use the Iron Man suit to heal himself after being stabbed in the abdomen by Thanos. For the final level 1 spell, take Fairy Fire or Expeditious Retreat. Iron Man moves very fast and even has afterburners or thrusters to increase his speed to incredible levels, so bonus action dashes do a great job of representing that ability in game. But I'm leaning towards Fairy Fire because I just love this spell as a D&D analog for any heads-up display system, especially those in helmets that have special targeting or tracking software. Good stuff. Level 2, and we're going to multi-class right away, and this is where most people mess up Iron Man. His repulsor blasts are not firebolts. They're not blasts from the Armorer's Infiltrator model lightning launcher. Why? They're called repulsor blasts. They need to be able to move enemies, push them around as well as do damage. We're lucky enough that Warlock has the perfect tools for the job. So here we're going to take a level in Warlock. For our otherworldly patron, I really tried to make Genie work. I thought there had to be something there with the Bottle of Respite. Disappearing into an extra-dimensional space where you can just hang out on some cool cushions and sofas, have a drink, relax. There had to be something there. Some of Tony's tech could fit there, right? And there just isn't. A private jet is the feeling I get, but man, is that a stretch. That would also give a decent damage bump, and with the Dow Genie, that opens the door for the Crusher feat down the road, which would add even more force movement onto the character. And perhaps most importantly, it would have prevented me from taking the Hexblade, which I did. It's just too good, folks. This gives us a really good expanded spell list at lower levels with Shield and Wrathful Smite. Hexblade Curse for added damage and some good synergy with our spells we get in a few levels, and Hex Warrior gives us proficiencies we already have, but allows us to use a weapon with Charisma. That's a nice have, but we're here for the spells. Warlocks get Pack Magic instead of basic spellcasting, the implications of which I won't rehash in this video. For our 2 cantrips, we're of course going to take Eldritch Blast. This will eventually be our Repulsor Blaster. It's just a work in progress right now, so hang tight. I'll also take Booming Blade. We don't have a good analog for Tony's Ultrasonic Blast, but sheathing an enemy in booming energy that stifles their movement or forces them to take damage seems like a decent enough fit. We will eventually have melee weapons to make this work. For our level 1 spells, Shield is an absolute must-grab, and Iron Man has demonstrated a few different versions of a shield that fit this spell, both with nanotech and pure energy. And I like Hex because it'll add to our damage, especially in a build that has a relatively free bonus action. But it also does a good job of replicating that HUD impact I like. Our AI targeting systems are locking onto an enemy and finding weaknesses, causing us to do more damage and exploit those ability checks, whichever we choose. So for me, it's less of a hex on them and more of a bump to our skills. At level 3, we're going to stick with Warlock because we need to complete that Repulsor tech. We're here for the Eldritch Invocations. And the 2 we want, and this is pretty much non-negotiable on this build, are Agonizing Blast, allowing us to add our Charisma modifier to Eldritch Blast damage rolls, and Repelling Blast, which allows us to move a creature up to 10 feet away from us every single time we hit them with an Eldritch Blast. Not only is this a great in-game ability, but it's absolutely perfect for an Iron Man build. We do get one additional spell at this level, and I'll take Wrathful Smite. It's just a great spell with a great debuff, the frightened effect that we can use once we have a way to battle in melee. You can play this off one of two ways. People have been shown to fear the Iron Man tech and the devastating effects it and the rest of the Avengers have had on various cities, or you can go the Hex route and just play it less as a debuff and more as your suit's defenses kicking into overdrive against that particular enemy. Either works for me. Level 4, we're going to go back into Artificer, and we'll jump to level 5 so we can get 3 levels in Artificer and our Artificer Specialist selection. We need to up these armor capabilities ASAP. Right now, you're still tinkering on that suit. You have the Repulsor Gauntlet, you have some makeshift body armor, and the mini arc reactor protecting you a bit, but we need so much more. Artificer 2 gives us infusions, one of the primary features of the Artificer class, and there are several good ones that we want. The 4 we want right now are the Enhanced Defensive Fusion. Anything that increases the protective capabilities of Iron Man's suit is something we will certainly want. Right now it's a +1, which will scale to a +2 at level 10. The Armor of Magical Strength infusion is a good start to simulate not only the armor's ability to increase the user's strength levels via a bonus to strength checks and strength saving throws, equal to our intelligence modifier, but also the back stabilizers that prevent the wearer from falling prone. The Homunculus Servant is a great addition to simulate any of Tony's little robotic companions featured in the earlier Iron Man films, or even drone technology controlled by any of his AI systems. And finally, Enhanced Arcane Focus does a great job of beefing up Iron Man's Repulsor Blasts, as they grant a +1 bonus to spell attack rolls, and ignores half cover when making a spell attack. This doesn't specify Artificer spells, so it would apply to all those Eldritch Blast attacks Iron Man makes in combat. Artificers can only infuse 2 total items at this level, so I would go with Enhanced Defense and the Homunculus Servant at this point, but any of the 4 would work. Just remember that you can't infuse the armor twice, so choose between Magical Strength and Defense. At Artificer 3, we get the right tool for the job, which allows us to magically create 1 set of Artisan's tools with an hour of uninterrupted work. Again, Tony tinkers. He's also a billionaire with access to any fun toy that he wants, whenever he wants. Play this whichever way you desire. For the Artificer Specialist subclass selection, we're going to take the Armorer. Like the Psy Warrior was created with the Jedi in mind, this subclass was certainly created with Iron Man in mind. This gives us proficiency with heavy armor, which is absolutely necessary for this build. The Iron Man armor completely covers Stark's body and provides an unbelievable level of protection, so getting this proficiency and full plate armor as soon as possible is a top priority. We're also getting proficiency with Smith's tools, and yes, Tony is proficient with Smith's tools. He doesn't just engineer and design his creations, he builds them and even forges them. Let's talk about the arcane armor that the Armorer gets. With Smith tools in hand, we can turn a mundane suit of armor, in our case full plate, into this arcane armor. This provides 4 benefits. First, if the armor has a strength requirement, the arcane armor lacks this requirement for us. This is great because Tony isn't a particularly strong individual, but his armor is engineered to be used by anyone, weak or strong. And more importantly, our strength is terrible, so this is necessary to avoid movement restrictions that wouldn't fit this character at all, beyond maybe the Mark I perhaps. Second, we can use the arcane armor as a spellcasting focus for our Artificer spells. This is perfectly thematic as the armor generates nearly all of Iron Man's powers except his intellect and ingenuity, but even that is augmented by the AI systems he created. Third, the armor attaches to us and can't be removed against our will. It also expands to cover the entire body, although you can retract or deploy the helmet as a bonus action. I mean, come on. Iron Man all day. The armor also replaces any missing limbs, functioning identically to a limb it replaces. This has 2 functions. It can replace the armor's own missing limbs, which we see happen plenty with Iron Man suits, but it can also replace the wearer's missing limbs, which we haven't quite seen, although we have seen the armor allow Rhodey to walk again after sustaining injuries in a fall. Finally, arcane armor allows us to doff or don the armor as an action rather than the normal times to put on or take off the armor. Again, Iron Man, collapsible suits. One final note, the armor continues to be arcane armor until you don another suit of armor or you die. I like this for Iron Man because the suits are powered by the arc reactor that he wears, and prior to Iron Man 3, if that reactor stops working, Tony goes into cardiac arrest and dies, and his suits no longer function. It's fitting. The question then becomes, which model are we going to use? I feel most people would read the lightning launcher and call it a day. A gem-like node on your armored fist or chest sounds like repulsor blasts and uni-beams to me. But as discussed earlier, it's actually not nearly as good a fit as Eldritch Blast plus Repelling Blast. And we need a way to engage in melee with this character. Yes, Iron Man's primary mode of combat is from range, but he does not hesitate to engage in melee with really anyone. Because of this, the Guardian armor works great. The Thunder Gauntlets bump our fist attacks to a 1d8, and they count as simple melee weapons, and they use intelligence instead of strength or dexterity for to hit and damage rolls, which is huge for us right now. They also give disadvantage on attack rolls to anyone hit by the gauntlets if they attack anyone but us. Nice little tanky feature. These gauntlets can simply be flavored as the regular punches of the Iron Man suit, or even more thematic would be the energy mallets and battering ram we see Iron Man use in his fight against Thanos. Don't forget that Booming Blade works with these gauntlets, and you should use that cantrip with any gauntlet attack for at least the next 2 levels. Finally, we get Defensive Field, which allows us to gain temporary hit points equal to our Artificer level, proficiency bonus times per day. Anything that bumps our ability to withstand damage is exactly what we want, so this is a nice have. Armorer also gives us 2 auto-prepared spells. Magic Missile works great as a proxy for Iron Man's targeted missiles that lock onto enemies and never miss. From a mechanical standpoint, this also combos really well with Hexblade's Curse, as the bonus to damage applies to each missile. You'll want to upcast this spell whenever you have a big bad and place the Hexblade's Curse on them. Thunderwave also works well for Iron Man dropping some small bombs next to him to take out nearby enemies, or fly directly into a dragon spaceship and blow it to pieces. For our additional spell at this level, I'm going to take Longstrider for additional movement speed. When you need to turn on those thrusters and get moving, this is the spell you want. Jumping 2 more levels to 7, Artificer 4 and 5, we get an ASIR feat. Here we'll want to boost Charisma. Our main attack is still Eldritch Blast, so we want to boost this ability score to maximize to hit rolls and damage. That said, again, for when we engage or get caught in melee, we have extra attack to use with our gauntlets. Now we can attack twice with those, using our intelligence modifier, and if we hit 2 enemies, impose disadvantage on both enemies if they choose not to attack us. Here we also get 2nd level spells, 2 auto-prepared spells, and 2 new preparation slots. For our auto-prepared spells, we get Mirror Image and Shatter, both great for this build. Mirror Image may not seem like a good fit at first, but when you realize Iron Man can summon additional suits to help fight his battles, those 3 duplicates of yourself are no longer illusory, but rather actual suits that take the hits for you. The big downside here is that Mirror Image works best on high dex builds, because a low dex, high AC build like this one will often have a duplicate destroyed that wouldn't have hit the actual person. In our case, the 9 AC of the duplicate is basically abysmal, and anything between a 9 and 18 would result in a lost duplicate, even though it wouldn't have hit us. I would use this in a worst case scenario when you have to be extra careful not to get hit. Shatter is just a perfect spell for a small arm missile that Iron Man uses. For the larger missiles that cause massive explosions, we'll want a different spell, but until that point, we'll happily use this spell. It damages not only creatures, but any objects in the spell's radius, and with a 60-foot range, it's right on point for any explosive missiles. For the 2 additional spells, Pyrotechnics works great to simulate the Iron Man flares that he uses to distract, confuse, and temporarily blind enemies. Levitate is our go-to spell for the pre-flying days of our airborne characters. This is early Iron Man with Tony just designing and testing his new flight boots and stabilization technology. He can't quite fly yet, but that levitation is happening. Heat Metal is another spell that we don't quite have room for now, but is probably the best fit for Iron Man's laser Tony design. There's no perfect match in D&D for a laser that just basically slices through pretty much everything. Maybe Disintegrate would work, but it's also not a perfect match. I like Heat Metal because he often uses it to melt metal hulls of ships or fix metal pipes, so it has utility uses beyond just OP combat scenarios. If you love this spell, feel free to mix it up with your daily preparations. Pyrotechnics can easily be subbed out for this spell when the opportunity calls for it. Now it gets really interesting, as we're going to leave Artificer because we need some more of that magic tech, and we need it fast. We're going to multi-class into Sorcerer. At Sorcerer 1, we get to pick our Sorcerer's origin, and here I really like Clockwork Soul, not only because it's one of the most powerful subclasses in the game, and almost certainly the most powerful Sorcerer subclass, but because I really like the idea of order and restoring balance as a driving force for Tony Stark. He lived a wild, chaotic life, but after his experience in Afghanistan and New York, and eventually with the Snap, his entire existence was dedicated to finding a way to fix things, to make them right, to put the world back together. And the fact that he sided with the government's authoritarian measures to try and regulate superheroes just solidifies that subclass for me. Here we get the Restore Balance feature, which allows us to use a reaction to prevent a roll from being affected by advantage or disadvantage. There are a million ways to flavor this. Flares, throwing dirt in the enemy's eyes, giving allies boosts or snarky comments at enemies, all of it works. Then we get Clockwork Magic, which gives 2 additional spells known per spell level and the ability to change out those spells for any abjuration and transmutation spells from the Wizard, Warlock, or Sorcerer spell lists. We will be making liberal use of this ability. For our 4 cantrips, we'll take Firebolt for more of that laser feel. Firebolt has the advantage of being able to target objects, which Eldritch Blast does not. so use this spell in those cases, but Eldritch Blast remains the far superior cantrip in combat. I like Frostbite as a way to replicate Iron Man's Zero cannons, which spray a cryogenic material at the target. Mending is an obvious pick here. This can also be flavored as the Zero cannons doing things like repairing hull breaches, or even Tony quickly repairing a homunculus. And finally, Light, because the Iron Man suit needs a light. For level 1 spells, you'll want to get Burning Hands, a perfect match for the flamethrower Tony uses in the Mark 1. He gets limited use out of this ability in the future iterations of the Iron Man armor, as I'm sure you will too. It's not a particularly great spell, and it won't be very good at this level, but in those rare instances where you can catch 3 enemies, it might be worth it to upcast this to do decent damage beyond what your gauntlets would do in that situation. I'd also take Expeditious Retreat for another option to get those thrusters working. Here we'll skip to Sorcerer level 3, Character level 10. At level 2, we get Font of Magic, and at level 3, we can supplement this feature with Meta Magic. We'll want Quicken Spell, which allows us to cast a spell as a bonus action for 2 sorcery points. This works great for Sorlocks that have a good use for Eldritch Blast. You can cast a leveled spell like Levitate as a bonus action and still get off 2 Eldritch Blasts, soon to be 3 as your main action. You can even quicken Eldritch Blast to get 4 and even 6 blasts next level, all with Force Movement Riders that will allow you to push around enemies all over the battlefield. Hopefully your table mates are throwing up area of effect spells so you can make quality use of that movement. Twin Spell works really well with a single target save or suck spell. We don't have a ton of those now, but we will have some good candidates in a moment. At Sorc 2, unlearn the Clockwork Magic spell Alarm and trade that for Absorb Elements. You can take Silvery Barbs as your new sorcery spell at this level. Like the Restore Balance ability, you can flavor this in a number of ways. The effect is very powerful and it leaves enough room for flavor to fit in so many different circumstances. It's at this point you'll want to make sure you stop preparing Absorb Elements with your Artificer spells. Heat Metal is a good grab at this point. At Sorc 3, I would drop Expeditious Retreat and unlearn Lesser Restoration. Switch that out for Spider Climb, which we'll use to replicate Iron Man's magnetic hand clamps that allow him to hold onto objects, even as he's propelled through space. Take Blindness Deafness as a proxy for the Gauntlet's Ultrasonic Pulse and Flash Beam. Both function like flashbangs that will certainly blind or deafen anyone caught within range. This spell is also a very strong candidate to be twinned or upcast, as it's fairly weak against one enemy who can easily make a save and you get nothing from it. But as you hit 2, 3, or more enemies, the likelihood of getting value goes through the roof. Binomial distribution for the win. And finally, at this level, take Scorching Ray, another spell that isn't particularly great, but will work well for us as a proxy for Iron Man's energy beams. Perhaps not as important as the Repulsor Blast, but they are certainly one of the most visually iconic features of the Iron Man suits, so it's a must-have for us. 2 more levels in Sorcerer brings us to Character level 12 and Sorcerer 5. First, our Eldritch Blast and other cantrip scale. We're now using 3 and occasionally 6 blasts in a turn. That can be devastating in the right circumstances. We get an ASI at Sorc 4 and take this opportunity to max out Charisma, so those blasts are even more powerful and likely to hit. At Sorcerer 4 and 5, unlearn Protection from Evil and Good and Protection from Energy. We'll hang on to the Aid and Dispel Magic spells. Both are very strong. Aid works well to get multiple downed allies up with a quick 5 or more hit point boost. Using Helen Cho's Regeneration Cradle technology to heal, repair, and create tissue, Tony adopted this tech with his own nanotechnology. Dispel Magic also works well as an EMP-style attack that shuts down enemy tech. Magic isn't technology, but for us it's one and the same. For the level 1 Clockwork spell, I'd really like to get Armor of Agathis. It upcasts really well, and it's a very strong spell. I can't find a great way to flavor this to make it fit, but if you can, go ahead and use it. Instead, I'll take Featherfall just because it's one of those spells that when you need it, you need it. How do we flavor it? Easily. When someone is falling, call Veronica or Friday or Jarvis and get those suits on your allies to lower them slowly to the ground, preventing sure death. With the new level 3 Clockwork spell, take Chardalon Stride. Flames blasting from your feet, granting explosive speed. Yes please. 20 additional feet of movement, and we don't provoke opportunity attacks, is right on point for the character. The fire damage the spell does is alluded to in Iron Man 1 when his thrusters do minor damage to the cars in Tony's garage, but this is mostly left out of the MCU storytelling. That said, it makes a lot of sense and I'm happy to take it and use it. Here we also get another cantrip and we have to take Message. Tony sending messages through his suit is just such a huge part of the Iron Man story, culminating in the endgame messages he sends to his family. It's powerful from an emotional standpoint, even if it's not from a gaming perspective, but we still want to have it. I would also unprepare Scorching Ray. It's just worse than Eldritch Blast, which is a cantrip, so it provides basically no value for us. We have Heat Metal for the laser proxy, so I'm fine losing this spell. This allows us to pick up Shadow Blade, a perfect proxy for Iron Man's nanotech blades that he summons, especially in his fights against Thanos. Unfortunately for Tony, to ill effect in their first confrontation. The Nano Katar or Energy Blades can be summoned just like a Shadow Blade. But for now, we're not going to use this spell even in dim light or darkness, which grants advantage on attacks with the blade. Our strength and dex is too low, and we're not able to use this in conjunction with Hex Weapon, which allows us to use Charisma to attack. A side note, which I didn't mention before, there is absolutely no reason you can't use your Hex Weapon feature on your gauntlets, so they can be used with Charisma instead of Strength or Intelligence. D&D Beyond doesn't allow you to do this, but I see no reason why you can't in the actual rules. But that 1 minute time limit of Shadow Blade means that it's basically impossible to wake up from a long rest and apply this feature to the weapon. For those 2 level 3 spells, we'll want Fireball for those big missile blasts that Shatter just won't cover. We are a level 12 character, so the spell's efficacy has decreased greatly since other casters got it at level 5, but so what? If there are 15 goons about to attack, blast them with this. If there are some big bads mixed in, quicken the spell and hit the big bads with 3 Eldritch Blasts and move them wherever you need them to be. And finally, with our last Sorcerer spell, we'll want to take Fly. It's concentration, it only lasts 10 minutes, but it's 60 feet and we can fly. This is another good candidate for Twin Spell or Upcasting. Tony isn't stingy with those suits, at least if you're someone close to him. Finally, you can fly around the battlefield and blast away. So where do we go from here? We have 5 sorcery points, some quality sorcerer spells, and meta magic options. Now we go to Artificer. We'll take 2 more levels to Artificer 7, character level 14. At 6, we get Tool Expertise, which doubles our proficiency with a tool, right on point for Tony's skills. We also get 2 more infusions at this level. Spell Refueling Ring gives an additional spell slot of 3rd level or lower, more juice as our suits get more powerful, fits thematically and functions well for us mechanically. I'd also take Boots of the Winding Path, which allows us to teleport 15 feet as a bonus action, but we need to have occupied the space during the turn. This just provides some additional movement options, which are good on movement-based builds like this one. At this level, we can infuse an additional item, which would likely be the Spell Refueling Ring. Extra spell slots are too good to pass up, and it fits with Tony's MO of constantly upgrading the power levels of his suits. At Art 7, we get Flash of Genius, appropriately named for someone like Tony Stark, but also a very strong ability that allows us to use a reaction to give a bump to an ability check or saving throw equal to our intelligence mod. We can use this intelligence modifier times per day. Right now that sits at +3. This is one of those abilities that we can flavor any number of ways. Either the suit or AI is aiding you or your ally, or Tony shouts some advice or help to save the day. Go crazy with the flavor options in these type of situations. I would unprepare Levitate to give us 2 new spells to pick. I would take Web here, and I know that doesn't seem to fit. If we could get to Artificer 17, I would love to have Wall of Force instead, but Tony has plenty of technology that can surround and restrain even behemoths like the Hulk. Web will have to serve as a proxy for this tech and the Wall of Force spell, as I quietly weep alone wishing I can get that spell somehow. I would also take Dark Vision and maybe take this much earlier because we never took something like Goggles of Night, and we are human, so seeing in darkness is a very real problem. The spell works really well with the Helm's heads-up display, which aids his ability to see. With 2 more levels in Artificer, we get another ASI and the Armor Modifications feature. Here I would start bumping that intelligence. We want to increase the DCs of our spells and increase some of the important Artificer abilities that key off intelligence, like Flash of Genius. Armor Modifications allows us to infuse each individual piece of armor, and we can infuse 2 more items as long as they are part of the armor. I would immediately make sure that we have Enhanced Defense and Boots of the Winding Path as my armor infusions, and Homunculus Servant, Spell Refueling Ring, and Enhanced Arcane Focus as my 3 regular infusions. At this level, we get 3rd level spells, which means we get the auto-prepared spells Lightning Bolt and Hypnotic Pattern. Lightning Bolt isn't a great spell, especially at this level, but it works perfect for an analog for the Unibeam, and yeah, it can even blast right through people. Hypnotic Pattern is a great spell and still effective at high levels. Once again, I don't have a great way to reflavor this, or a clear Iron Man ability that this would map to. But if you can figure it out, let me know, and let everyone else know in the comments, because this is a great spell to use. For our new spells, I would unprepare Fairy Fire at this point. Our concentration is being used on Fly or maybe something like Web. And here I'd pick up Revivify to replicate more of that nano healing. Tiny Servant for more Iron Man bots and drones. And finally, Water Breathing, because the Iron Man suits come fully equipped to handle any environment, including underwater and even in space. Now we can jump all the way to Artificer 12, character level 19. First off, Eldritch Blast scaled again, and now we have 4 memes. With Quicken Spell, that would give us 8 Eldritch Blasts in a single round, all with Repelling Blast 10 feet of movement attached. At Artificer 10, we get the Magic Item Adept feature, which allows us to attune to up to 4 magic items, and allows us to craft magic items faster and cheaper. We also get 2 additional infusions and level 10 infusions, which are quite a bit more powerful than the ones we've had before. Here we get the Helm of Awareness, which we will take and infuse. I love this infusion as a way to replicate any type of AI system or heads-up display, both of which Iron Man possesses. Here we can replicate magic items to get the Winged Boots infusion, which allows us to have concentration-free flight, which is huge. Our speed drops to 30 feet from the fly spells, but for the price of concentration, that fits perfectly okay. I'd also switch out the Boots of the Winding Path for Gauntlets of Ogre Power, which will bump our strength to 19. This allows us to use Shadow Blade whenever we're in dim light or darkness for a very solid damage bump while in melee. My 5 infusions at this point would be the Wing Boots, Enhanced Defense, now a +2 to our AC, the Helm of Awareness, Gauntlets of Ogre Power, which do a decent job of mimicking Iron Man's strength, and the Spell Refueling Ring for some extra spell slots. Artificer 11 gives us the great spell storing item. We can store 1 first or second level spell in this item, and then keep it, or give it to someone else, give it to your homunculus or tiny servant, and they can cast this spell a number of times equal to twice our intelligence mod. This will eventually be 10 castings of the spell. Aid and Web are good choices. Flashbacks to Iron Man and Spider-Man together. Single tier. At Artificer 12, we get another ASIR feat, and here I'm just going to bump up that intelligence. Right now we have a 20 intelligence, a 20 charisma, right on point for Tony, and a 19 strength with the Iron Man armor on from the Ogre Gauntlets, and a 20 AC without a shield. That can be bumped up to 25 with the shield spell, which we'll use plenty with 6 first level spell slots, 2 of which come back on short rest. Here we get an extra cantrip, and either Frostbite or Ray of Frost are good choices for the zero cannons. You will almost certainly use neither of them at this point, so it's not a huge deal either way. I'm going to hold off on talking about the leveled spells because at level 20, Artificer 13, we get 4th level spells. Here we get the Armorer spells Fire Shield, which provides protection against either fire or cold damage, which is a welcome ability and fits perfectly with Iron Man, especially after the freezing issue Tony solved in Iron Man 1. The damage dished out to attackers within 5 feet isn't a great fit, but it's not enough for me to ignore the spell. Greater Invisibility is a really strong spell that allows us to turn invisible and remain invisible even when we cast spells or attack. Most of Iron Man's suits don't have this functionality, but the Mark 15, codenamed Sneaky, does have the cloaking technology. If you're going to use this spell a lot or even decide to switch up your playstyle, you may want to switch Armorer models to the Infiltrator, which matches well with the Mark 15 due to the sonic dampening thrusters that make the suit extra stealthy. The Armorer's Infiltrator model has a dampening field that gives advantage on stealth checks. For our 3 additional spells, the first one we want is Summon Construct. Yes, the Iron Legion. Our Iron Man suits are constructs fighting side by side with us. I love it. We can even upcast this at level 6 to give the construct 3 attacks per turn. Those attacks will use our spell mod to hit and do 1d8 plus 10 damage each. Of course, we'll have to use the metal version of the construct, which does 1d10 damage to anyone that hits it with a melee attack. I also like Arcane Eye, more drone tech, or small Iron Legion suits to do our scouting. And finally, Fabricate, because Tony Stark can turn a pile of metal into whatever the hell he pleases. And with that, we have the man, the myth, the legend. He is
Iron Man.
If you made it this far, you are a champ. If you skipped ahead, then shame on you. I kid, of course. I hope you enjoy this build as much as I enjoyed putting it together. The original didn't include any sorcerer levels, so I had to go back to the drawing board after my research phase. And thank goodness I did, because sorcerer adds to the build, both in terms of power and character design, and really pulls it all together. Obviously, the Warlock levels are entirely necessary and are kind of the foundation of the build, despite Artificer giving the most of the 3 classes. If you like what I do here and would like to see more, please consider subscribing or sharing the content. If you prefer to just like or watch, that's really great too. And until next time, folks, always remember,
I love you 3000.